So good morning and welcome to everybody to this webinar looking at low-cost capture of performances for art and culture, brought to you by The Space. I'll just say, my name's Linda Coburn, I'm the moderator today, so I'm setting this session up, and I'll just start by introducing you to The Space. We're an arts commissioning organisation, the UK's digital commissioning and development agency, as you can see from the slide. And so we work with a whole host of arts organisations, helping them to create work for audiences on digital platforms and extend the reach of their work. And also we have a strand of learning and skills development, which is what this workshop is part of. And you can find out much more about us from our website. To the session today, we've got five really great speakers actually. And because we work so much with organisations on particular projects, the core of what we're talking about here today is fantastic case studies, examples of how people have captured performances in different ways. So we'll start with our development producer, Natalie Woolman, who'll give you an overview and open the session up. And then the first part, we're looking at captures of performance that have kind of video at their heart. So we'll hear from Joe Nolan, who exec produced Strange Concord, and we'll also hear from Magnus Dennis, who is one of our associates, who is a director and a cinematographer, so he'll speak from that perspective. And then after the break, our second two speakers are really focused on projects that they have captured they've taken different format, a different creative approach, and used audio at the heart of their work. So that's Joe Crowley from 1927 and Daphne Attias from Dante or Die. And then we'll bring all of the panel back together. So that's your opportunity to ask them questions that haven't already been covered. We try and make this as interactive as possible. We ask for questions wherever possible, and we use the live chat. So if you want to keep that open, that's a great thing. So that's a way of discussing things between yourselves as the audience. You might have really good examples to throw in, because this is all about knowledge sharing, and you might have questions for the speakers who have already spoken or who are about to speak. And then there'll be moments where I'll say, have you got any questions for our speaker on screen? So use that chat to talk to all of those people. The only other things to say about Zoom are we have a live captioner. So if that would be useful to you, you can use her services, and by going to the closed caption button at the bottom. And also we're recording this session, and so if you would like to see it, just let us know if that's of use to you, a recorded version. You can email us afterwards. And the last thing I want to say before we really get into the content of what we can cover today was that we asked for questions in advance, and there were lots of things that you've asked about that we simply don't have time to cover everything. So we're going to offer you some links to helpful resources for some of the areas we won't be talking about in great detail. So just to be clear about what those are. Distribution of work, like how do I find an audience for it, which we covered in 2 or 3 previous webinars, which are all on our YouTube channel, which we'll put the links into chat if that's a thing you're really interested in, working out what platforms to use, how to engage with your audiences. We aren't covering specific questions about live streaming today, though Magnus, who's one of our speakers, has done a previous webinar that included live streaming. So again, the links will go into the chat for that. And another thing we really don't have time to go into because it's so complex is rights. But luckily, we have produced a really excellent rights toolkit. And again, we'll give you the links to that. Some of these things will get touched upon, but just to be very clear, we can't cover them in any great detail. So I think that's all I want to say to you at the moment. I hope you really enjoy this webinar, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from all our fantastic speakers. And so first up, I'm going to ask Natalie to join us. So Natalie Woolman is the development producer at The Space, and she's kind of going to give us a bit of an overview. So Natalie, the first question really for you to think about is, we know that as a producer you've worked on a wide range of capture projects. When you think about the most successful projects, what is it that they share in common?
Hi Linda, and hi everyone. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. When I look back, I'd say there are 2 key things that unite the most successful projects. First, that the team behind them has a really clear idea of why they are making the capture and who they are doing it for. Like producing any kind of live show, there are an infinite number of ways to capture a performance piece. Everything from the big early decisions, like whether you want to make a video or audio only capture, to choices about how it's edited, what music you want to use, what your title sequence will look or sound like. Everything will have a big impact on the feel of the final capture and your audience's experience of your work. So you need to keep hold of why you're doing this and who you're making it for in order to inform all those decisions you'll be asked to make along the way. Secondly, as we'll hear today, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to a capture, and every project is unique. So it may sound like I'm stating the obvious, but the best captured productions put storytelling first. We're going to hear later from Daphna at Dante or Die about how they transformed an immersive theatre show about grief into a really powerful video podcast. I don't want to speak for Daphna, but from an outsider's perspective, it seems like they looked at their show, which was incredibly intimate about personal relationships, grieving, and this connection we all have with social media and our smartphones. And so to capture it for digital distribution, they decided to go for one of the most intimate digital formats available, a podcast, which they made even more personal with their use of graphics designed for mobile devices. But we'll hear more about that later. By way of contrast, last year we filmed the BAC Beatbox Academy's Frankenstein for the BBC. And that means it was high end in terms of both technical requirements and budget. Nevertheless, the principles still applied. Frankenstein is set in the present day and explores what it's like to be a young person now. The performers are all young and incredibly talented, and everyone wanted the film to appeal to younger viewers. So we got a brilliant emerging director to shoot the film, and she styled it like a series of music videos and shot most of it in an underground car park. The result was absolutely spectacular. Now, there may have been a big difference in the budgets of those two projects, but both teams thought really deeply about what their story was about and who they wanted to connect with, and use that knowledge to create really powerful digital assets. Both captures were different from the original productions, but entirely authentic to them. And that's because they put storytelling at the heart of what they did.
Thank you. And so just to be clear, so the workshop that we're running today, it's about what we call low cost captures. But, low cost, you could say, is a relative term. So in space terms, what do you mean by low cost? What is it that we're looking at today?
Yes, so the $1 million question, money. Frustratingly, in the same way there's no one size fits all for how to film or record a production, there's also no off-the-shelf budget template. However, today, as you say, we're talking about low-cost projects. In the Space's own annual low-cost commissioning round, I would say generally people applying for low-cost video projects apply for the top amount of £11,000. That being said, organisations often bring match funding to the table too, but of course it's possible to do things more cheaply depending on your show and your setup. But as a rule of thumb, I would class low-cost video capture projects as anything from about £8,000 to £30,000. Audio projects are significantly less expensive. And again, there's a big range, but anything from about £2,000 to £5,000 is viable.
Okay, so that's our definition of low cost. But let's acknowledge it that for some of the audience here today, low cost means a DIY budget. And we know that because of the questions that people sent in advance. What would your advice be to organisations or people who have those very limited resources, a DIY budget?
Yeah, of course, I understand that even low cost is high cost for some artists and organisations. I think if your budget is really tight, I would start by going back to those key questions and ask yourself what it is you're trying to do and say and capture of your show with this digital asset, and ask yourself who you're making it for. I would be aware that audiences will have their own quality thresholds in terms of what they watch online, and it can be hard to hold people's attention, especially for a long form project, if the quality of the footage or the sound is poor. So I would try to think about what you can afford to do well that comes right from the heart of your project, and think laterally. Perhaps that's making a podcast, or making some pieces of short form content, or approaching how you film something in a different way. So for example, filming on a phone becomes part of your creative approach. In 2019, the Space commissioned Theatre Uncut to make a low-cost film of Kieran Hurley's play Bubble, which is set online. So all the filming was done on phones with added graphics, including emojis edited in. It was a really fresh approach where the form matched the meaning of that show, and it worked really well.
Thank you. So I think the other thing we'll drop into the chat is another link to a previous webinar we did looking at filming short form content that gives you some really practical tips about how to do that using phones and simple and lower cost equipment. And another thing really is, thinking about what examples everybody has seen of fantastic content made creatively with a more limited budget. That's a really useful thing to think about. And so, Natalie, just to finish off, one of the questions we were asked in advance was, how do I understand what's possible before I even start? What would your answer be to that?
The best way to start is to work out what you do and don't like by watching and listening to loads of content. I can't emphasize that enough. Lots and lots of content, not just in your own genre, but other kinds as well. And there's certainly plenty out there after the last year. Some things that you see or listen to will work for you, and some things won't, and that's absolutely fine. But work out in your mind exactly what they are. If you're briefing a crew or freelancers or even members of your own team, having examples of what you do and don't like can be really helpful, either to share or simply to inform how you brief those teams and bring everyone onto the same page creatively. Watching and listening to other content will hopefully also focus your mind on what your own story is and what you want to get across, what's the USP of your project, as well as ideas of how to do it. I know I keep going back to this point, but as I'm sure our speakers today will agree, capturing an arts project is a huge amount of work, and it's easy to be subsumed by the so-called bogs and boilers, agreements and contracts, filming permits, who's going to be where, when, what the crew are going to have for lunch. So it's really important to think through and keep in your mind throughout the process what you're aiming for creatively and editorially up front, and keep coming back to it at key moments in the production. So you keep that vision with you and your team throughout the process.
Brilliant. Thanks, Natalie. That's great. A really good start to our session. So I'm going to ask Jo Nolan to join us now. Hello, Jo, are you there?
Morning, Linda. Yes.
Hello. Great to see you, Jo. So just by way of an introduction, so you head up Screen South, and you were the exec producer on the Strange Concord project.
Well, I wasn't exactly the exec producer. I was production producer.
And
okay. I know why you said exec, because there are two, and I do exec loads of stuff. So
okay. So and that thing about the roles will become quite important as we speak more about the project. So can you start by giving us a really short overview of Strange Concord, and then we'll show the trailer, which gives a flavour for for how the project works.
Yeah, thanks. Strange Concord was a film that was set at Prospect Cottage in Dungeness, Derek Jarman's cottage, and using excerpts from his book Modern Nature, with two really beautiful classical pieces which accentuated the whole atmosphere, both of the work and of the cottage and that environment. And the first one was John Zorn's Specimen for a String quartet, and the second was Henry Gorecki, Goodnight Opus 63. We were lucky enough to attract Ben Wishall to be the reader, and I mean an excellent set of musicians who were all filming this project in one day, although there was a second part required, down in Dungeness last October.
Lovely. Okay, so let's watch the trailer then, and you'll get a feel for the project.
black crows tumbling across a darkening sky. Everything I perceive makes a song. Everything I see saddens the eye. But Gran's garden, in spite of its shadows, was a place of sunlight. No longer cultivated, its herbaceous borders long since softened by invading daisies and buttercups. It was slowly returning to the wild.
Lovely. So this is a piece that's created with a digital audience in mind. What can you just say something about the experience that you wanted to create?
We really wanted people to feel like they were in the space. You know, we were aware, when I have to say this was part of the Creative Folkestone Book Festival, so it was curated by Sean Doran and Lynn Brown, who had a vision of bringing the book and the piece alive on screen for an audience who initially they thought would be sitting in a cinema in Folkestone, and it would be a remote live feed. Then as it turned out, we really knew that that wasn't going to happen. So how do we make that work? So the whole approach was to have an as live, evocative, filling the environment, feeling like you are in Derek Jarman's cottage, which is, you know, an exclusive opportunity in its own right. So trying to hold that atmosphere and trying to just feel like you are looking around the space of the cottage and being in that place for the moment, if you like. So trying to keep that and personal atmosphere.
What were some of the sort of decisions that you took to make that come to life, to get that feeling in that atmosphere?
Well, number one, it's very small. So trying to get a string quartet in one room, and then a piano that had to be brought in, and a pianist and a flautist, and then the reader Ben, you know, and trying to make that work, and for it to feel like there was nobody there other than those people performing the piece in an empty space was the biggest challenge. So we had to be very careful, number one, because we were in the beautiful heritage space that is Prospect Cottage. Everything in there is kind of special, and it's been, you know, archived in a particular way. So we were very lucky to get the permission to shoot this. So we had to have everything. We didn't want to move it and clear it out so that people felt they were in an empty space to create more room. We needed for people to really see what was on the books behind, what's over there, what those paintings, what's that. I mean, he's got wonderful work all over the walls, and, you know, we were able to keep most of it. So we had to really be careful about keeping the atmosphere, protecting the space. But then we're going to put in, you know, a whole load of kit and cameras and sound and people into a space that we also had to be very COVID friendly aware with. So the most important thing really was that we all, as Natalie said, had a unified vision, so that when we were in there on the day, everybody was working to the same agenda. Everybody knew what the score was, and we had to work very efficiently, and we had to work very tightly. We had two runners and a third person who their job was to make sure it was COVID safe. That was number one for us, because in terms of health and safety and risk, it was really, so we had three people looking out for that, as well as looking out for protecting everything in the cottage and making sure that everything was put back exactly. It's like a set. And then we had 4 musicians in one room, 2 musicians in the other, and then 2 huge, you know, pan drums that would just have to sit in this small, you know, kind of cottage room and still reverberate and still, you know, get the cameras in. So we worked very closely with our production camera team, who were Advision, who had done some live theatre work and sports work and live event work. And this was very different, because they had to really work as live, record and edit as live, so that when the whole piece went out, it was, you know, it had that energy to it. And we had to make sure that none of the kit was seen, because it was just, that was a decision made. I mean, we could have gone for hanging lights and lamps and everything, but because it was a Prospect cottage, we didn't want to interrupt the view, if you like, for the viewer. We wanted them to feel they were in the room. So that was a big challenge.
So a lot of what we talk about in terms of capturing is thinking about the sort of pre-production process, and that's been one of the questions that we've come at. So did you think about all these things in advance, or did they suddenly appear to you? Because you're sort of bringing together two processes, aren't you? The creative theatrical performance and the planning of the filming. Did you do a lot of work in advance?
A hell of a lot of work in advance. Because Sean Doran, who was fantastic, it was his first experience really of having to really work with a film crew like this. He's obviously worked with film crews before, but this is very intimate. It was very much about telling the story as well as you know, giving a beautiful performance. So Sean and Cheryl, who created Folkestone, Cheryl Pierce, they were the creative team, if you like. They had their vision. They knew what Sean knew exactly what he wanted to do. Cheryl knew how she was able to bring those people together to do that. Then we had to realize their vision on screen. So I had to find, as producer, a director who would have, you know, a really good understanding of this type of event, this type of project, which is unusual in many ways, and have the sensitivity and the empathy, and but be really technical and really spot on and efficient. And I found, you know, Matthew, who was fantastic from Mad Vision in Canterbury, with his team. And we sat down, he went, oh God, yeah, it's going to be, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. I said, no, you can't put a broadcast fan on the shingle. You can't do that. There were loads of things we just couldn't do, which made us really hone down. It was a low budget for this sort of event, you know. It was something that we had to be absolutely crucial. Do we actually need that? Do we need that person? Do we need that camera? How are we going to make this? So using hot heads and using tracking, one main camera, 4 hot heads, we were able to keep it really simple.
So you spoke to me about the hot heads and said it's one of the things you learned to do in COVID times that you might.
Great, I loved.
Do you want to just briefly explain to people what a hot head is?
Well,
It's one of the,
a hot head is a very small camera that works on a remote head that you can operate from, you know, obviously remotely, another room or outside or wherever. So it means you can have 4 or whatever, however many cameras in a space, and you can't see them because they're, well, you can, they're about the size of my hand, you know. So you can, and you sometimes you do see them in the background going, because somebody's moving them like that to focus in on the violin or something. And I just found them great to work with, and I thought I really want to do a drama like this next time. And then having those 4 and having a really excellent operator who absolutely, I mean, the thing was they'd all been inspired by Jarman when they were younger, and they all were local to, you know, the kind of Kent area and very aware of it. So they really wanted to make this perfect. The crew absolutely bought in to everything that the creative team and ourselves, myself and Matthew, wanted to achieve. They took it on themselves to religiously ensure that everything we wanted was going to be perfect, because they understood the vision.
Okay, so which is sort of echoing what Natalie's point.
Yeah.
Another thing that I know that sound is very important, and again we've had questions about that. You know, could you? We haven't got time to go into great detail, but you know, when you're thinking about sound as a consideration, what are your top sort of tips to people? How should you be thinking about sound when you're capturing a performance?
If you haven't got sound, you haven't got performance in the sense of audio visual. And audio comes first, actually, in that line, doesn't it, usually? It's absolutely 100% most important. You can make pictures work with extra elaboration if it's not quite right. But you can't make sound work if it isn't right. It has to be captured beautifully. And you have to work with people who fully understand the nature of the sound that you want to achieve, because there are different, you know, do you want the live sound, do you want the record? There are so many ways of sound sounding. So you really have to have the same creative conversation with your sound recordist and your sound designer that you would have with your production designer and your camera, your DOP. Absolutely crucial. They have to feel part of the team. They have, so often sound is just like, well, where are they? And oh, they're left out the picture and they're not taken seriously. And if you take sound seriously, and whatever that means to you and whatever you're trying to achieve, you know, you're going to have 100% better film. It's crucial, and you have to talk about the type of sound and the kind of the way you want it recorded. How much are we going to see? I was saying, you know, we decided that we didn't want to see anything, but there was some very intimate sound required there with an opera singer and 4 violins and, you know, the flautist. The sound, the position of the mics was really important. So we had a really good relationship with our sound team. They were excellent, and they came really prepared because they'd done a recce. They knew exactly what we wanted, what I was looking for, and they really were quite superb. So that's because they bought into the vision. They've got the technical know-how, so you have to give them all the information, so they bring that technical know-how to the front rather than just go, oh, I'll stick a boom in and it'll be fine. We had loads of mics all over the place. They were hidden behind different mics, picking up different sorts of sensitivity. So yeah, really, it's a great craft, and if you get skilled people, it will enhance everything you're doing.
So a lot of what you're saying is about the sort of the skills of the people involved, and I'm just asking the audience whether anybody has any particular questions for you, Jo. But just what so you've spoken about, you know, the importance of the crew and thinking it all through and planning. Is there anything else that you know, overseeing a whole production? Maybe you want to say something about the relationship between the theatrical team and the production team in this case, and how important it is to get that right.
Well, yeah, you know, and that's an interesting one, because who's making the decision on the day? At what point does somebody say what I say goes? And when you're working with somebody who fully understands the concept, but the practicalities are different from a creative director and a production director, and understanding. And I think as a producer, I had to really ensure from the start that there was a respect and understanding about both roles between the producer and between the creative director and the production director, and that they understood each other's challenges, and that it was really important that our production director had an empathy with the piece, that they had an empathy with the music, that they could read music, that they could talk to the musicians in a way that on the day it would be, you know, Matthew's voice feeding back and talking through, and giving Sean that communication tools, the tools of communication with Matthew that would be effective on the day. And he had to kind of rehearse that in a way in the discussions that we'd be having about how we're going to shoot this and the shot lists and all the planning that goes into every single minute. We knew exactly what we were going to do. We planned it exactly like you would any other shoot. We tried not to leave too much to chance, and in that process both directors, you know, understood each other, so they knew how to communicate effectively when we were on location.
Thank you. Somebody's asking a question saying, do you have a template that you work through when you're, you know, producer, getting the process in place? And I think the question is broadly.
Well, yeah, of course. Yes, there is 100%. And well, as another project that we run is New Creatives, and we're producing, you know, several projects, film, interactive and audio on that. And we give people a full production pack, which is the start to finish of every decision you have to make. And it starts from day one of, you know, when you put your application or when you put your pitch in. So yes, there really is a template, and it really helps to figure that through. And it'll probably take up too much time, Linda, to go through it. But
I'm thinking, so the New Creatives is a project that the space is involved in, and I'm wondering, Angela, who's our comms person, is on, she'll know whether we can share that template. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, I don't know. But yeah, so you're saying,
well, I would say, yeah, I mean, there are lots of books out there about, you know, kind of basically once you start making a film, there are forms involved from number one. There are templates for everything. So I would say before you start worrying about the templates, because they're all out there, and yes, I'm sure we can find something that could, you know, answer that. But get the vision, absolutely get your vision, get your creative, do everything you want beautifully creatively, and then worry about that process, because that process, there are skilled people who will help you do that.
Lovely.
namely a first AD and a producer, a line producer.
Yeah.
They go through everything and will ensure that you have everything in place on the day of the shoot, or
Yeah.
the week of the shoot, or the month or year of the shoot, whatever it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Planning.
Right, so we're not able to share the new creatives template, but as you say, they're out there, aren't they? If you just Google production processes, you'll find other people's examples.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us? Just this a sort of last question to you, you know, in terms of how do people react to it? What's happened as a result of this, of making Strange Concord?
Well, it went out, didn't it, in November, which was a kind of a time when people really were reflecting, and so there was so much, you know, the story of modern nature was so evocative of what was actually happening. The timing was amazing. So it went out for a month as part of the book festival. Because of rights, we couldn't do it for more than a month. But the response was, I got some beautiful feedback. I have to say, people did feel they were in the room. The sound was spectacular, and the whole feel of the edit was very in line with everything that we had visualized, and it was a kind of micromanagement of every decision between Matthew and Sean about that, and I think it really paid off. They were just completely committed to making it as perfect as they possibly could, so that you felt you were in the room.
Brilliant.
And I think they pulled it off. I think they did.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jo. That's great. We're going to bring Magnus in now. So you'll be disappearing off. We might bring you back for questions at the end of his section. So thank you very much.
And it was fun. I didn't say that, but it was a lot of fun. We had a really good time doing it. There were some struggles, you know, location-wise. It's very, very protected down there, but they were fab in the end. And yeah, I think you've got to have a light energy running through the whole thing to make sure that everybody works at their best level.
Thank you. Are you happy to keep an eye to chat, so that if people have got questions for you specifically, they can keep on asking Jo questions in chat? Brilliant. Okay, so you can mute yourself and go. Lovely. Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Magnus Dennis. Magnus, are you there?
I'm here. Hello.
Lovely. Good. So following on from Jo, so this section we're really talking about one case study, and then I'll get you to say a little bit about your role and what you do, but really you're sort of drawing out some of the sort of key principles that you think about when you work with arts organisations. So do you want to tell us what your role is when you're working with an arts organisation?
So I run a company called Meerkat Films, and we produce either captures of shows or live streams. So I'm a producer, so I would be part of the development process, hopefully. I mean, sometimes it's kind of already been done to a certain point and you're picking it up, or if I'm involved right from the beginning. So it's going through, like people have been saying, like those choices that you have to make, the decisions you make that determines how you're going to film a show, really going through making those choices together, and then on to actually producing the show, you know, bringing a crew together and actually filming it.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's what, you know, when we spoke before, you said, you know, you always start by sort of getting that thing, understanding the vision and working out what it is that people want to do, and that then determines the choices that they have to make. So we're not, you know, you're not going to give us an overview of all the choices you ever have to make, but what we're going to do is sort of think about some examples from which we can draw key principles, really. So do you want to just say a bit more about that, really, when you're thinking about how you get arts organisations or the producers to think about what they want to make?
Yeah, it's really echoing what's been said already. That there's an endless series of choices to be made. I was thinking about a metaphor, and I kind of came up with, it's a bit like playing chess, where every move you make, it kind of determines the rest of the game, you know, and every time you make a choice, then that precludes other choices later. And also, like chess, it's quite hard to go back. So you have to be really quite careful, I think, because once you've made a choice, it sometimes sets a series of things in motion that are quite hard to reverse. So like you said, Linda, I think it's really important right at the beginning to have a really clear understanding of what the show is about, what it means. I think I said once in a call, soul of the show. So Linda's kind of put that on my kind of taglines. But I guess it kind of makes sense. It's like, what the real core meaning of that show is, that you have that in mind all the way through when you're making those decisions, so that you don't end up at the end looking back and saying, well, we've kind of created ourselves a slightly new thing here. You know, it's great, but it isn't exactly the show that we wanted to adapt into film, you know, because you can adapt a show, or you can kind of re-envisage and just create something totally different, and normally that isn't really what you want to do. Hopefully you look back and go, that's my show, but now it's in film form, and you know, hopefully like works just as well. It's just a different form. So yeah, so understanding the show I think is really important. I do have some examples to talk about, and they are of shows that I've filmed which have taken completely different approaches, like really polar opposite approaches. Like I say before, there's millions of different ways of film a show, and none of these will probably fit exactly with, you know, the show that you have. So it's really just principles of like making decisions. We filmed I think I can say Northern Stage's Christmas show back in November, because it's already finished and gone out. And I do have a little clip if anyone's really interested. That I think was devised during lockdown for an online audience. However, it was very much a live show. They planned it to be performed from start to finish on stage. All of the sets moved live, the lighting, everything was designed like you would for an audience. And so it was very, they were very keen for it to be captured like that. So we captured it in quite a traditional way, if you like, having a very substantial multicam setup, and essentially just running the show and filming it live, which is not, you know, quite an unusual way to do it when you don't have an audience. You know, why do it like that? You've got the luxury of stopping and starting and, you know, doing all kinds of fancy stuff that you couldn't do live. But for that show, that genuine kind of live performance with the flow, you know, the actors, the performers kind of knowing where they are, and all of the choreography of the sets changing was all part of it. And they were very passionate. That's what they wanted. We did film additional shots on another day to kind of add to it. So we kind of, it was a fusion of two different approaches, but hopefully that the soul of the show, you know, the live experience is captured. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we just filmed a show a couple of weeks ago, which was an existing show, but they completely redesigned it. There was new sets, new lighting design, the script was changed, the costumes were changed. It was all, I mean, in almost all ways, a new show. But again, you know, hopefully the core of the show is there, and all those choices to make those changes were made based on it working as a film. So it needed those things to be done for it to become a great, like, dynamic, entertaining, interesting film for children.
Have you got some examples of the kinds of decisions that you had to make? Just a couple, the specific examples.
Well, so for example, the sets. So this show was put on in schools for kids, and they would like rock up and set up the set very quickly and perform within, you know, an hour of arriving. So yeah, they could have just done that. They could have said, well, let's just hire a venue, put the sets up, and perform it in front of cameras. You know, in a way that's like the simplest, you know, most boring, if you like, way of capturing the show, and that would have captured quite genuinely how the show was produced previously. But, you know, because you don't have to set the sets up in 1 hour, you're not filming in a school, why not do it in a more lavish way? You know, so the choice was basically, well, we've got the medium of film, you know, let's embrace it and use it to amplify the magic, you know. And I guess the point here is, if it's live, you have audience in a room, then they're immersed in that live experience, and their imaginations take them to, you know, incredible places. Arguably, a film doesn't do that. I think it's more about showing, it's more about escaping it. It's taking that person and transporting them to another world, rather than letting them fill in the gaps and imagine it therefore, you know, they were filling in the gaps of the children's imaginations, I suppose. I just said that. I'm not sure if the theatre company would put it in the same words, but that's how I, you know, imagine it. So there's a snowstorm for real in our film. Obviously, there was no real snow in the live show.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So people are asking for the clip. So maybe when you finish talking, you'll share it with us, and then everybody can stick it into chat. Nobody can see.
Yeah, so I can share the Northern Stage show, because that's finished and gone out, and I've got a clip of that which kind of shows the like capturing it live type of feel, and some Steadicam shots cut in. The show I'm talking about now, we've only just started editing it. But perhaps there's a way I can keep in touch and give you some stuff later.
So you're talking about Steadicam, and I think we're mindful our audience is from a performance background, not TV or broadcast production. So just in a nutshell, what does Steadicam mean?
So if you just have a camera on a tripod, you know, everyone kind of understands how that's going to feel. So you could have loads of cameras on tripods and just film a show. A Steadicam is a piece of equipment where the camera operator is kind of flying around the space almost. It's like gliding around. Often we use Steadicam on the stage, and we're actually following actors around, and it's a magical kind of immersive experience. Very similar to gimbal, which people these days use gimbal a lot. It's like an electronic equivalent of the Steadicam. So and it makes a very smooth kind of flowing shot, which is really great.
I think sometimes when you know the language and the things the technology that's available, when you start looking for it, you see it in other examples, don't you? And you can start to think, oh, that's really useful, I could try that.
There's not many films now that don't feature a gimbal or Steadicam, and you can spot it immediately.
Thank you. So you're talking about sort of the opportunities that film offers to kind of get into a story in a different way. But one of the things that you said to me is that that when you're thinking and planning and organising to capture a performance, there are problems that arise just because you're capturing. So if you already have a piece, there are new challenges to face. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think it's a really big thing, this, because obviously theatre makers are experts in their field. They're like, they know everything about making a theatre show. And film, there's a lot of overlaps. And I think often you kind of think taking a show and adapting it for film is a fairly kind of easy process in a way. And people sometimes get tripped up because there are like you say there, Linda, that there are problems that arise that you just wouldn't think would be problems. And I've got a really interesting example of this. I'm working with Natalie at the moment on a show, and it's a physical theatre show. So it's like dance and movement, and there's a continuous score all the way through. So it's 100% music, but also the natural sounds of the performers are a key part of the story as well. So the breath sounds and footsteps and all kinds of interesting, like real room sounds. So, you might be thinking, well, fine, so what, that's fine, just go and film it. But the reality, the technical reality of actually filming a choreographed music, like a dance show which is synced to music, and capturing live sounds is really challenging, because if we have the music playing out of speakers in the room, great, the performers can hear the music and dance in time with the music, great, but then we can't capture any live room sounds because it will just be obliterated by the music. So we turn the speakers off, but then they can't dance it accurately, they can't dance together, they don't have their cues. So actually there's only really one proper solution to this, which is the performers wear IEM headphones, so they can hear the music, but it's not in the room. Problem solved. And that's really the only like concrete easy solution. The show, the people running the show, for many reasons, it's not a viable option for them. The performers can't wear IEMs for various reasons. So it's been extremely challenging to get around this issue. And we found you always do, there's always a way. It's just all about this like choices, about sitting down, talking it through, coming up with options, you know, one option will have a consequence here, another option will have a different consequence, and you go, well, which is the choice that I want to make, that has, you know, that will get me the product I want and as least kind of destructive consequences. So we found a way around it. We're going to do it. It's going to be fine. But I really think the theatre company hadn't foreseen that challenge, and it's just an example of the kind of thing which crops up regularly. That you have a show and then you go to film it and it's like, okay, that's a problem that I hadn't imagined was going to be a problem. And can sometimes mess up your budget, or it can sometimes force you to change your show a little. And, you know, it can be challenging. And it's all about the difference between film and theatre, really.
Lovely, thank you. I'm just looking, I've asked if there's any questions for you, and I'm just having a look. One says, so what is the solution to that conundrum?
Yeah, I left that hanging, didn't I? So the solution we've come up with is it's a huge solution. So essentially the cast are going to be rehearsing for weeks before with the music, obviously, and also rehearsing without the music. So they're going to learn to reproduce, not the whole show from beginning to end, that would be impossible, but short sections from muscle memory that they'll actually learn to perform it without the music. We'll film it with the music because we have to. That's the only way that we would guarantee, you know, every cue point's hit and it all works brilliantly. But then we'll film it without the music. And on that take, we'll capture the natural sounds in the room. And then we'll edit the two together. It may be that 90% of the visuals are from the with music version, and the sound is from the other version. Or it may be that actually they do a pretty good job remembering the speed and the cues, and more of it can be from the other version. It may end up being a huge challenge in the edit because the sounds that are created might not fully match the performance, you know, from the other, when the music's playing. And yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest consequence for it, other than it being a huge amount of extra work for us afterwards and a huge amount of extra work in rehearsals, the biggest consequence is it's going to take a long time on the day to do this. We have to film the show more times than we would otherwise. So the biggest consequence of this is going to be less time to actually, you know, perfect it. You know, where we could run something again because we want it better, we won't be able to do that. We'll be running it again just because we need the sound. So there's always a consequence somewhere, but that was literally the best we could come up with. Okay. I wonder if anyone's got any better solutions.
Yeah, stick them in chat, please. Right, so we've got a couple of other questions. They have to be really short answers, Magnus, because we're quite tight for time. So one is about lighting. How do you cope with shifting lighting states when shooting live? So do you have a sort of top tip there?
Well, if it's a live show and the lights have been designed to move, you know, and come and go, and that's part of the show, then you just embrace it. We often do work through lighting cues and adjust them because they tend not to work quite the same on camera as they did for the eye in the room. So we often do adjust it anyway. If you want to hide the changes, then yeah, that's challenging. I think you would have to think about cutting to different cameras to hide changes. It could get very complicated.
Thank you. And there's another question, which is when you're streaming versus capturing and distributing at a later date, so that'd be live, making a live stream something or capturing it for later distribution. Do you use the audio from the speakers in the room, or do you add a music track in an edit?
So it's one of the big difference between streaming a live show and capturing it for later is, I guess the elephant in the room here is, yes, you could just have the sound coming out of speakers in the room and just film it with the music, a bit of the music, and then pick up the sounds as much as you can and mix it together. That's how you would do it if it was live, because you can't turn the speakers off. That's the show, isn't it? You might even have an audience there. So the problem is that it wouldn't be very good. You know, it's just not the best way to do it. The quality of the audio, the quality of the music would be spoiled by the echoey kind of boomy nature of secondhand recording. So the sound's coming out of speakers, you're miking it and recording it, you know, secondhand. Whereas it's much better to have a clean record with no music and then add the music later, and it's going to sound much better. And most shows that have music, like all the way through, or there's songs, the music's really important, and you don't want it to sound all boomy and, you know, distorted and stuff. So that's, yeah, that's the main reason to do it differently. Does that answer the question? You may, I mean, I guess the other elephant in the room is if the music was exactly the same, there is a compromise here where you have a little bit of music coming out of the speakers and you add it in post as well. So you kind of mix between the, slightly boomy, not great sounding, but it does give you that reverby kind of sense of the room. And then you add the recording on top. But that's assuming that the music isn't going to be changed, which is another complication that we have.
So it's a story of consequences, isn't it?
Yeah, choices and consequences.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind staying on to answer any more specific questions that people have, but can you just say something really briefly, because Joe also sort of has just picked up on using post-production to grade your work. So we haven't really spoken about post-production, but you know, in terms of being different to an actual performance, there's this thing that you've captured it all, and then you can use post-production to edit and do different things. But again, presumably there are decisions and consequences there in thinking, oh, we can sort it all out in post-production.
Yeah, it's dangerous to be like relying on that, but that's another major difference between a live stream and a capture. Is there's huge amounts that you can do. Joe mentioned it briefly in her talk there, that there's huge things you can do in post to fix things, but also make things look better, grade the footage. That means like change the color, or you know, make it more vivid or more contrasty. And there's work you can do on the sound, like I'm saying here, like cutting together like a sound from one take into another. But you can't do that live. That's a very long, laborious step that you do in the edit that may take weeks. But hopefully in the end, you'll get something like really polished and amazing. Whereas a live capture, it's something different. It's live. The buzz of it is that it's live, and you know it's live, and it might be a little rough around the edges and the sound isn't perfect. But it was live, and that's hopefully where the magic comes from.
Brilliant. I think we'll stop there just in the interest of time. Thank you ever so much, Magnus. We're going to have a very short break, just 5 minutes. So we'll be back very specifically at 11:58, and we'll start again at that point. And then will you, Magnus, if you come back online at that point, and then you might have a look and just check there aren't any more questions for you, and if anybody wants to add questions in, they can do that. Sure. So that's it then. So we'll reconvene at 11:58 and continue. Right, so welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your break. In this second part of the webinar, we're really concentrating on creating lovely experiences for audiences that have audio at their heart rather than being about video and the visuals, although that comes into it too. And we've two speakers joining us who are Daphne Attias from Dante or Die and Joe Crowley from 1927, the theatre company. So I'm just checking that you're both here. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
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 Nice to see you. And so I'm going to start with you, Joe. We're going to start with, we're just going to do this more of a conversation this time because I think there's quite a lot that you have in common. So we're going to start with Joe, and just as Natalie said at the beginning, this is all starts with story. And just can you introduce us to the Decameron Nights and why you thought it would be a really rich experience for a digital audience, and then we'll hear the trailer.
So just a little bit about who 1927 are. So we create theatre and opera shows that are a fusion of digital and the live, in terms of that they are a synchronized fusion of handcrafted animation, stop frame animation, combined with live performance and music. So that's what we ordinarily do. We had created a theatre show called Roots, which was a collection of 11 folk stories that we were touring. It had kind of opened in summer 2019, and it was kind of due to tour across the world in 2020. When the pandemic hit, we kept thinking about Roots, and we kept thinking back to some of the inspiration sources for Roots. So Roots, like I said, was a collection of folk stories. And some of the books that we'd looked at to collect those folk stories included a very specific book, which was Boccaccio's The Decameron. And The Decameron is a book that was written in the 14th century in the wake of the Black Plague. And the book itself looks at, the narrative of the book is a group of friends gather in quarantine in a villa in Vienna, outside Venice, to kind of escape the Black Plague. And then every night they share with each other a series of stories. We kept thinking, isn't it ironic that we've lost all our touring, and that actually yet the show that we were touring was one that was also kind of inspired by the notion of storytelling and plague and kind of isolation. So we had this seed of an idea of going, maybe there's something there. And we kept thinking, what is it? What is it? What is it? And we began to think about Roots, and we began to think about the Decameron, and we started to think maybe there's something about how we use stories over the coming months, weeks, months, years, who knows, as individuals and as a kind of society to help us get through what lies ahead, which made us think maybe we should go back to the roots of Roots and think about how we adapt what we'd created as a storytelling experience.
Lovely. Okay, so let's now watch or listen to the trailer. It's not the trailer, it's the intro, isn't it?
It's the introduction, yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to 1927's Decameron Nights. Close the door, dim the lights, pour yourself a nice warm glass of Bovril, and let us pass the time together by telling tales. But what tales to tell in such strange times? Episode 1, I'm All Right, Jack. A trio of unfamiliar folk tales about looking out for number one.
Great. So just to sort of explain to the audience, then you won a BBC Culture in Quarantine commission.
Yeah, so we'd originally conceived of what we wanted to do was to take 10 stories and turn them into 10 podcasts that we would release one story a night for a period of 10 nights. That was our original idea. We applied to the Culture and Quarantine Commission, secured that, and then actually, because of that, we were approached by BBC Radio 3 to actually create it as something that would get broadcast on Radio 3. So that slightly tweaked then how we approached it, and we moved from the 10 stories to looking at a triptych of 3 episodes where we would collate 3 to 4 stories a night for 15 minutes to have a kind of late nighttime audio experience for the listener.
Lovely. So a late nighttime audio experience. Fab. So we're going to leave it there, and then we'll bring Daphne in, and then we'll come back to think a bit more about how your format evolved, because you have two very interesting stories here. So Daphne, can you set us up a bit about Dante or Die, and then tell us about User Not Found?
Sure. So Dante or Die, for those of you who don't know us, we make site-specific work. So we make work in real working places, whether they're leisure centers or hotels. And specifically, when we made User Not Found, it started from the story. It started from an article that we read about a woman who lost her husband and then had to dive into his digital legacy, basically. And we were working a lot in cafes on our laptops, and we really thought about the two spaces, the cafes and the digital space, the place you go to be together alone, and the place you hide in from the people who are next to you. So when we produced User Not Found in the real live show, which opened in 2018, we had a group of 50 people coming into cafes. We toured all around the world with it, different cafe, different places. Every audience member would receive headphones and a mobile phone. And the mobile phone that they received in the show would mimic what Terry is the protagonist of the show. So we could read the messages he's reading. The phone was both a realistic tool that progressed the story, and also a poetic tool, a surreal tool that helped us dive into his dreams and his fears. So as I said, the show was always aimed at a very low capacity audience. So we started dreaming about a digital version of the show before the pandemic. So when the pandemic started, a lot of people asked us, oh, did you rewrite this? Or is this new material? And we said, a lot of it was rewritten, but some of the bits weren't rewritten. They just became more relevant when we all started having this kind of relationship with our phones. So I guess we talked a lot about our intimate relationship with our phone, how we touch it all the time, how it's the thing that we are close to for most of the day. And we wanted to look at our phones as the site for the show and use our site-specific making skills and transition them into kind of a digital format and make the show primarily an audio experience, but with visual interventions, and that would happen on people's personal phones.
Thank you very much. And we'll come back to that idea of a kind of visual podcast afterwards, but let's watch your very short trailer just now. Thank you. So those first few seconds give a sort of sense of what you see, and you've come up with this format that you've called visual podcast. Visual podcast.
We call it a video podcast. Actually, you were right. Okay. Yeah.
So what was the thinking? What kind of process led you to that particular format?
We had a lot of conversations about it, and a lot of people tried to warn us not to do that because it either needs to be a video or it needs to be a podcast. And I think we really stuck to our guns there because we felt we want people to have this intimacy of a really immersive sound design in their ears, but the story to be progressed partly by visual information on your phone. So we went through lots of different names. It was a a vodcast, it was a visual podcast, it was an audiovisual podcast, then we called it a video podcast, which now is catching on as a term, and people say it as if it's accept that it is what it is. And if I think that was one of my biggest learnings, just kind of believe in what the format that you think your project should have, and stick to it. We did speak a lot about the platform it should go on, and whether it should be an app or not, because an app would have given us a lot of creative freedom, like it would allow vibrations or lights to come up or interaction. But from asking quite a lot of people and doing a survey around it, we realized a lot of people will resist downloading an app just for one creative engagement. So we opted for existing platforms. So it's available on YouTube and on Facebook and on Instagram. But yeah, we wanted something in between a video and a podcast.
Good, interesting. And we can put the link into the chat, can't we? Because it is still available, and people
it is still available for the next
listen to the whole thing. Thank you. And Joe, so what were the kind of decisions that you made in using the format that you created? What kind of got you to that point?
I guess, I mean, the first thing was, for 1927, that felt really odd, was deciding to strip away all visuals, and that we decided that we wanted to create an oral audio intimate experience, and that it was a kind of micro storytelling experience that could be listened to as though you are gathered around a campfire with others, but actually you're doing it in isolation by yourself. And that felt really important, but actually trying to work out how we took the kind of layers of aesthetic that we put in our stage work, which is, you know, kind of highly visual, and there's multiple layers of how you kind of sensorial experience the work, and how we kind of took that approach and embedded that into the creation of a sound journey and storytelling journey, which was quite a challenging thing. We'd never made a piece of audio work. However, we had actually kind of been founded as a company creating work that was first heard on the radio. So the company came about through Paul, one of our artistic directors, hearing Suzanne reading a poem. So it also felt really important that we were going back to the basics of where we came from as a company, but we really had to interrogate how you tell stories and how you communicate to audiences. What was really important is that, you know, we went from conceiving it as a podcast that we'd kind of create in our own way to collaborating with Radio 3. And the great thing about that was that we were given a mentor, a producer, a radio producer, who kind of helped us along the journey. I mean, in all honesty, the kind of team at Radio 3 gave us kind of free rein to do what we wanted to do. They completely trusted us, but there was a really important dialogue around the difference of how an audience experiences work, listening on the radio, versus how they experience work in a live context, or possibly even in a kind of podcast context, which felt really important for us. I don't know if that answers the question.
So carrying on thinking about the audience experience, so what were the differences? What were you working with?
I mean, we were mostly working in sheds and at kitchen tables in complete isolation. And, you know, the team was all over the place. We have 2 locations. We're in Margate, we're in London, but also some of our team are based all over the country. So we had a team completely disconnected, learning how to record, learning how to capture, sending things backwards and forwards, in isolation, and working out how we layer it all together. I think what was really important was us realizing that there was one really great thing, which is that it took us a few months to create this, and it felt like in the midst of a pandemic, we were still crafting and creating and experimenting and focusing on something that would be a creative, fresh, original experience for an audience, and keeping that in mind is really important. But also thinking about how we approach collaborative co-creation in all of our work, and how we would do that through this, which meant that we worked with our close-knit team. We didn't bring in anyone else. We kind of worked out where our skill sets were, where the craft abilities were, where we needed to bring in 1 or 2 specialists to support us. Yeah, I mean, we were completely making it up, if I'm really honest. We had no idea if it was going to work. But what we did do is because they were a series of collection of stories, is we could kind of create one of the stories, send it backwards and forwards, listen to it, and then actually the structuring of the kind of of the sequence of the 3 episodes, we didn't put those together until the very end. We decided we'd focus. We decided that we would focus on each of the. You can guarantee as soon as you're talking, somebody phones you. It's typical. Sorry about that, everyone.
All right.
We decided that we would focus on getting each of the individual stories created and then work out how we would sculpt it together, which is exactly what we'd done. And we had the approach we'd taken to the live theatre show, we were taking to the audio experience as well.
So using your own skills to the maximum, and then thinking, where else do we need somebody where can we get some support here?
Yeah, and also where, the point at which you bring in other people, or in the same way as we would in a live context, bringing in kind of people to listen and to work out what does and doesn't work.
Yeah, lovely. So I'm going to bring Daphne back in, actually. So what was how did your process work? Are you hearing things that sort of echo with how you?
Absolutely. I really relate to what you're saying, Jo. I think it was completely a process of discovering things in the dark. We have a wonderful team, the team that made the original show, whether that was the technical element or whether that was the sound or the performance, all of it. We had a really brilliant, clever team, and we were also all working separately. But so much has changed from the moment we pitched the idea. We thought it will be 9 episodes of a podcast that we'll release 1 episode at a time. That was actually our first offer. And the more we explored it, the more it all came from the story itself. We realized actually what we want is for people to experience this in one go. So we tried to we cut it and make it shorter and more relevant to the form. Still, when I watch how people watch it, because you can do that online, which you can't quite do in the same way in a real life scenario. So you can see people come in, watch 5 minutes, and then log out, and then come back a week later to watch the rest of it. So, of course, I would hope people would sit down and watch the whole show beginning to end. But they don't quite do that online. They do it differently, and I think that's absolutely fine, obviously. But we learned a lot, mostly about audiences' behavior. Plus, I think audiences' behaviors changed during the time that the video podcast, since it came out. So I think the whole field of what is called, I guess, digital theatre, or capturing performance, or I don't even know how to call it. I think it's evolving now as we speak. So it's really exciting to watch how people receive it.
So can you be specific about how audience behaviour has changed? What have you noticed?
Well, I guess I guess we don't have a real live theatre to go to, and I guess it will change again once it opens. So there's a lot of appetite out there for different creative content, and people have the time to watch it. I guess they might not have time. So when we go to the theatre, we go at 7:30, I'll take a babysitter, I'll go out and I'll sit there for that whole time. Whereas when I watch an offer that is out there now as a podcast or as a video podcast, I will do it at home in between things with more interruptions. So in the live show, we give people phones. We deliberately gave people phones because we didn't want to rely on people's own technology, and we didn't want to exclude anyone. In the video podcast, people use their own phones. I can't control if their uncle sends them a text during the experience. I wish I could, but I honestly can't. So these are little things that you have to consider that will be part of the experience. Real life becomes more part of the experience.
And in sort of thinking of this, was there, one of the questions we were asked in advance was, are there any specific elements in the making of the video podcast that you felt were very different to the original theatre storytelling? Have you learned anything new from doing it?
I learned lots of new things. I mean, the main difference is that there is no live performer and we don't see the performer. So a lot of the work with Terry, who performed it, my co-artistic director, Terry O'Donovan, was how to perform it in audio completely. That was a hugely exciting challenge for both of us to work it out. Also to work out the intimacy that you could deliver it in. And bring people into the world and make it feel like he's in their heads or in their phones. It was a similar process with the sound design. As I said earlier, we had things like we had interactive things that we could control because we had the control over the phones, whereas we didn't in the video podcast. So we had to use little cheats, like something that sounds like a vibration that makes us think that the phone is vibrating, but actually it's just a sound that sounds like it. We used a lot more sound that creates space around you. So we listened to a lot of times to the mix to hear how it sounds. We brought in some expertise in special effects to change some of the things. And of course, we learned a huge amount about reaching audiences and about copyrights and about how to produce something like that. That was hugely challenging and interesting.
Thank you. Jo, what about for you? Is there anything specific, new approaches that you've used for this piece?
Not initially. At the end, yes. I think actually for us, it was kind of keeping it as pure as possible. The experiments and the collaborations were key. And it's a curious one because although the end product was completely different, it didn't feel that different to creating a piece of performance. Now, it might be because the live performance that started the show actually started where we would gather audiences together in a room and share stories. So we were going back to the roots of this piece. I think that for us, it wasn't that we tried to do anything different. It felt really important that we collaborated with the kind of key creatives that we always work with, that we brought in the expertise that we knew we had within the team so that we could have that kind of production dialogue. But then if I fast forward to the end of the show, like when we conceived of it, it was a podcast. By the end of it, it was a radio broadcast, but we then also took it a step further and collaborated with BBC Research and Development and Connected Studios on an immersive audio experience version of one of the episodes, which was a whole new ball game for us. So then we felt a little bit more like, okay, we're in completely new, undefined territory here, which was very exciting.
Absolutely. And just as a bit of a plug, I think that the 3 episodes are still available on iPlayer, aren't they? Although I don't think you can get to the immersive, the experiment.
No, I think both. I think I think the podcast, it's now available as a downloadable podcast for 2 years, I think, on BBC Sounds, because it was part of the essay series, which lasts for 2 years, I think. And then on BBC Taster, the immersive experience was live still last week.
Okay, good. So we'll point everybody to those. So I'm just going to check and see if there's any questions from the audience, for anything that's coming up for the audience they want to ask you. Just give them okay, so the question is for Jo. Interested to hear more specifics from Jo about the differences she learned about the way audiences experience work listening on radio versus live context or in podcast.
I mean, what's really interesting in terms of radio is that you actually don't know. I mean, I'm being really honest. It was really interesting when you were saying, Daphna, about, you can see who's interacting. Now, we actually don't know how people were interacting with Radio 3. We know anecdotally because we know people have contacted us or we've seen things on social media. We know how people have interacted in the kind of BBC Taster version, which is the online digital version of it. But in terms of, a live broadcast, we don't know. And there's something kind of wonderful and fascinating about that. It really made us as human beings interrogate how we listen to the radio. And I realized that for the last year, I've listened to the radio all the time. I actually don't really watch things. I want to listen. And so we kept projecting an audience doing that, and an audience accidentally encountering and accidentally experiencing. And that is really exciting. The notion that you have an audience that didn't choose to listen, but that might get stopped in their tracks. And how do you do that? And how do you stop them turning off? But actually, we don't really know how successful it was because it's not ours. It's not like we can say, where's the box office report? We don't have that.
Interesting, isn't it? Daphna, have you got any, are you going to respond to that? You're sort of nodding and agreeing.
No, I think it's interesting. You can't see your audience. We're so used to seeing the audience and used to forcing them to be in a room with us for a duration. I mean, most of them stay for the length of the show, and we can't do that anymore. So there are many things we don't know about. I don't know how they experience. I don't know why they stopped watching. I do know when they sometimes came back, I think we're still going to learn some things, as I said earlier, because it's such a new offering still. So I'm personally excited about the next bit that we're going to learn. And in terms of measuring the success of it, because that was one of your questions and Joe touched on it, I think it has to be a moving goalpost a little bit, because what makes it a success for us, it's when we get comments from people and people write to us and say they really enjoyed it or that really worked. And that's sort of more important than the numbers and the reach, which are obviously greater than what we would have reached with the real live show, and broader as well geographically. But a real success is knowing that somebody engaged with it in a meaningful way.
Lovely, thank you. So we're coming to the end of our time. We've been asked a really great question, which I'm going to put to both of you, and then I'm going to ask the other speakers to come back in and sort of carry on answering a similar kind of question, and that will take us to the end. So the question we've been asked, so I'll stay with you, Daphne, because you're here. But it'd be good to know whether your Dante or Die are going to continue creating more work in this vein once live performance is possible again.
We are actually working on it. Really opened up our appetite. In fact, we had an appetite a little bit before, so we're working on 2 digital offerings. One would be a film and one would be another piece which is made for hopefully mobile phones, and it will also have hopefully a live and a digital version of it. They might be slightly different offerings but relating to the same topic, and we're really excited about kind of new skills to bring in to develop it. So yes, we are.
Really, all those learnings from the last year are going to sort of send you off in a new direction and help you to sustain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks, Daphne. And Joe, same question to you, really. Will you be carrying on, continuing in this vein in the future?
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, it wasn't that new because we always make audio work. Our work is really aural as well. It is about spoken word, it is about music, it is textured, multi-layered. So, in that respect, it's like we continue crafting what we do. It's just the way it was delivered was for a different audience, in a different medium, in a different context, which I think, every time you open up the door of possibility of how an audience interacts with your work, you go, oh God, here's another one that we're going to have to keep doing now. And not in a bad way. It's just that thing where you go, oh, it does work on the television, it does work on the screen, it does work on the radio, it does work on the stage. And so suddenly it's just about trying to work out how you calm down. But also it opens up the possibilities of where a creative compulsion might manifest itself in the future. And that's really exciting. So it might be we have a creative idea that comes up in the future. And rather than going, we're going to pursue radio work or pursue digital work, it might be that idea would lend itself best to that platform. And that's what we're really excited about, is like that. The possibilities now are really wide.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Joe. I'm bringing Joe Nolan back in. So what new practices that you have picked up over the last year might you adopt in future or aim to adopt?
Well, I know multi-camera has been around for years, but using it with new work and using it on that low budget level is really exciting. And to work with artists who are, as Joe put it so well there, format agnostic in a way. It's like the idea leads the way, and then looking at that, what will best work, multi-platform, one platform. And we're about to open a digi studio down in Folkestone, partnership across Kent, which is exactly what that innovation work is going to be about. So I'm really delighted to hear the excitement in the room. I just think that in terms of, it's really interesting looking back at the chat that technical, how do we cover this, are there processes, are there formats? Yes, there are. If somebody from film went into theatre, they'd be totally intimidated with that big black box and how the hell are we going to make this work? I've worked in theatre and audio and film, so I kind of understand those multi-format places. A lot of people in film have never been in a theatre. So, it's actually, I think we're in a really interesting place now because people have had the time over this last year, not only to see new work, but to also they're developing new skills and new approaches, and the audiences are looking for them as well. Fingers crossed. I really do think they are. and to bring, to have a really interesting theatre company doing audio work, being on Radio 3 is just the way to go, isn't it?
Okay, I'm going to have to.
I could talk all day about this. I think it's really exciting. Multi-platform creative work is
brilliant. 2 minutes left, so a minute for Magnus and then a minute for Natalie. And before we go to Magnus, we're going to put there's an evaluation form. We really ask you if you wouldn't mind taking a minute or two to fill that in. This is to the audience. It helps knowing, getting the feedback is what allows us to bring you these webinars at no cost. So there'll be links in the chat if you wouldn't mind. That would be hugely appreciated. Magnus, in 1 minute, really, what have you taken from new practices from the last year that you're going to put into your work going forward?
Well, I can tell you what the companies we've been working with have said to us, like one of which is that they've realized that if they have a show that is live in the theatre and they have an audience in, they could also have a filmed version of that, which maybe goes out live or is pre-recorded. And that enables them to reach audiences that people that wouldn't come into the theatre because of distance or because of disability or because of, you can have captions, you can have audio descriptions. There's all kinds of stuff which you can add to an online version, and also just, I guess, reaching audiences in other countries that wouldn't even know who you are. So that's interesting. But I think Joe Crowley there was just saying is absolutely right. I mean, it's another tool, isn't it? And to look at a project and to go, this would make a great film, let's do it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that every single project in future should be a film, because sometimes they don't actually work very well. And you think really we should be encouraging people to get back into a theatre. Sometimes yes, maybe other times let's just go back to how we were.
Lovely, thank you very much. And Natalie, I'll just bring you in for a final thought. A brief final thought, and then we'll finish.
A very brief final thought. Well, I think it echoes just what everyone said. I think one of the most telling moments of this whole session was when Joe Nolan said right at the end of talking about Prospect Cottage, and it was really fun. And that's certainly something I think we've got from Joe Crowley and from Daphna about how exciting these opportunities can be. The one thing I would say, we've seen, online space has been incredibly noisy and chaotic in the last year. So it's what we are working with companies to find, what it is that works for their story, as everyone said in this last roundup. And it's sort of giving you permission to not do everything. You don't have to follow, a peer company's doing this, so we must do this for our show. It's about finding the right format for the heart of your show that really excites you, because it can be really exciting, not only creatively, but as Magnus has just said, in terms of the possibilities it offers up for audiences. So it's sort of, you don't have to do it all, but find the format and the sort of proposition that's really going to excite your company and your work for your work.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you to you all. It's great. It's been so generous with your time and your consideration and your enthusiasm for the work. So that's fabulous. Thank you, audience, for being with us and asking lots of great questions. And just to say, our next webinar, date still TBC, but we think early May, will be about creating very short form content for some of the short form platforms that are out there. So sign up to the Space newsletter if you haven't done already, and you'll be informed of when that's coming up. And that's it. Bid you farewell and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all. And speakers, you can go now. That's we're done. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Ah.